Hi there, everyone. How's it going tonight? So, I'm starting the live stream 15 minutes early just to do a little bit of an intro. And this is on another podcast that was in response to our live stream, along with a few other basic posts on FB and people's comments. And they were talking about radical feminists. So hopefully you can hear me. If there's anybody there, please let me know you can hear me. Right, so I've written a few notes here. I watched half of their podcast. I didn't watch all of it. Right, so one of the things that stood out to me was they didn't really know what rape culture is. And this was a woman who she used to be a radical feminist, or she claimed to be one of the two. She was either infiltrating or she really was a radical feminist. And she's saying, America loves rape and making a big joke out of the words rape culture. So you'd think a former radical feminist would actually know what rape culture is and what it isn't. And one of the guys said, you can't have a discussion with someone who says you're okay with rape. Now, these things don't actually make sense to radical feminist analysis of what a rape culture is. So I'm just going to break it down sort of basically. I mean, we can go into this in more detail if people join me later. But rape culture isn't the overt saying, oh, yeah, we're all okay with that, it doesn't matter. Rape culture is where people hear about it, an isolated incident of it, and they say, oh, no, how terrible, that's awful. And then they move on, forget about it, and go to the next piece of news. Meanwhile, the case never makes it to court, or if it does make it to court, even if the rapist is found guilty, there's practically no real repercussions for that. We saw that with a 6-year-old who was raped by a 17-year-old who admitted it. He pled guilty in court in Queensland and got 2 years probation. So if he doesn't commit another crime in the next 2 years, he's not going to have a criminal record at all. Now, if a 6-year-old can't get justice, who the hell can? And that's just one incident. But rape culture isn't what people are overtly saying. It's the enabling of it to occur on a regular basis. Okay, so, now that we've got that one out of the way, I think we can, look at what this woman said as just being a little bit on the silly side. So let me have a look at my notes here. If they will actually open. Damn it, I've got somebody trying to message me at the same time. Sorry about that. And I don't want to leave silences, so I'm trying to open the damn thing, but I've got a message sitting in the way of opening the one that I want to see. So where are my notes here? Let's get Messenger out of the way. Okay. So just scrolling up through my notes now. Here we are. Okay, now she then said, they're going out of their way to see evil things. They want to see evil things. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, that's, not my goal. When I'm looking at the news and I'm looking at patterns, my goal is to understand the world around me. It's not to, get some kind of kick out of so-called evil things. And I don't even know if the word evil is the right word. I mean, yes, some of the things that go down are absolutely horrific. But, evil tends to be a word that I associate with patriarchal religions. And so it's something I try to avoid using. It plays into the good and evil narratives, the black and white narratives. Much prefer to just say, we have a lot of wide and varied horrific events that occur. But it's not the events themselves that we focus on. It's the connection between events, the patterns that emerge, and looking at what can actually be done about it. So it's not about going, oh yeah, how terrible, and moving on. So Illusions Destroyed is the podcast that I'm referring to here. And one of the guys saying, these evil things in regards to that, he said, this is all the world is. If it was all the world is, I think most radical feminists would switch off because we wouldn't be able to handle it, When we look at these things, we talk about these things, we understand that the percentages of how often this stuff's occurring, Like I can tell you that, the United States, rape affects 1 in 5 women and girls and 1 in 12 men and boys, whereas in New Zealand it's 1 in 3 women and girls and 1 in 7 men and boys, and in Australia it's 1 in 4 women and girls and 1 in 9 men and boys. So we look at that as a pattern. Obviously, it's not all the world is. If it was, then it wouldn't be 1 in, it would be 100%. Okay, so that's just breaking down a bit of what Illusions Destroyed talked about in their response to radical feminists in the Kavanaugh stuff, talking about their original podcast, which is, by the way, coming from a conservative perspective. And this guy asked, how do these radical feminists keep up the energy to do this? And he's, of course, seeing it as a negative. And he compared it to, his sports team winning. And he's like, when my sports team wins, I get over it within like 2 weeks. These people, they're coming, his wording was, they're coming in hot every day. Okay, so how do we keep up the energy to do this? Well, for me, the reason that I have energy to get into radical feminist space every day is because I've got a life. I'm doing other things. I'm thinking about other things. I have a lot of joy in my life. If I didn't have that, this would be a very strong weight. It would be a very heavy burden to carry. But I have to offset it with things that are, downtime, fun, people, friends, going out, enjoying the sun, even enjoying the rain and a cloudy day. And then Tasha comes in and she asks, why are these radical feminists trying to silence 2 men and a woman? So, Tasha, if you're listening to this, and I know you're not right now, but if you do, we're not trying to silence you. The views expressed, by you were reflective of conservative thought voiced by many others in many different forums. So Illusions Destroyed was simply being used as an example of what conservatives are saying. It wasn't necessarily about who was saying it. And, freedom of speech, let me give a lesson in this one. Freedom of speech isn't the right to not have any response to what you say other than 100% agreement. Disagreement is not silencing. Disagreement is responding to what is said. So, you have the right to voice your opinion. Shocker, so do I. Free speech means people have the right to respond. Response is not silencing. And in this thing, they were also going on about, they called it pro-abortion. Now, I really don't know who is pro-abortion. I know people who are pro-choice. Pro-abortion makes it sound like women are going around trying to force abortions on people. And as far as I understand, pro-choice means respecting people's right to choose, irrespective of what their choice is. And that's not just between having it and keeping it and having an abortion. It may be having a baby and adopting it out. It could be having a baby and having a sister, mother, or grandmother raising that child. So there's a lot of different choices in this. And so pro-choice is not mandatory abortion. And they're also, as conservatives do, talking about it as a baby, baby murderer stuff. Now, an embryo or a fetus is not a baby. This is like really emotive language. And the point of which is to make out like radical feminists are crazy women going around murdering babies. We're not. We're women who see women's humanity and give a shit about it and say, I trust you to know your own life circumstances, and to be able to make a decision in your own circumstances. And I'm not really sure what the whole pro-choice, pro-life thing had to do with Kavanagh and radical feminists, but the Conservatives went into that area because that's what they do, any chance to get their opinion out on why women should be forced to birth. Now, the next thing they did was they said, oh, these women are keyboard warriors. All they're doing is they're attacking those who are doing things in the world. And I've got to laugh at this because I personally just got back from Portugal where I was speaking in Parliament. When I got back, I had surgery and I'm due to speak in Parliament in Melbourne in 1 week from now. And, that's how I'm balancing my own personal life with my activism. I literally go around talking in Parliament. And so I'm sort of wondering, what does Tasha do that is real world activism if she's going to be calling radical feminist keyboard warriors? Is a podcast really that important? Maybe she does other stuff. I actually don't know what she does. So I'm sort of having a bit of a guess here. But I'm going to take a stab in the dark that it isn't as effective as worldwide lobbying in Parliament. Just putting that out there. And then they made a whole heap of jokes about white supremacy because Tasha had been accused of being a white supremacist. And what they did was they miscontextualized this as pertaining to the Illusions Destroyed post rather than being where it actually came from. And the only reference I've ever seen to her being called white supremacist was actually by multiple Black women in America getting screenshots of Tasha's posts on Facebook and showing that this was not just basic racism, it was outright white supremacism. And, I think I'm going to listen to Black women from America talking about a white conservative American. When they say it's white supremacy, I'm going to listen to that and I'm going to believe it. That's my choice. But, they're trying to say that the white supremacy thing came from these two guys in Illusions Destroyed. And to the best of my knowledge, neither of those people are white supremacists. They're conservatives, but they're not, part of white power. So, okay, well, I'm just going to go through my notes again, see what else they had to say about all of this. Yes, okay. They said that they'd been called butt ugly rape apes. And look, on this one, I'm going to side with Illusions Destroyed, the Conservatives on this one, and just say, look, that's uncalled for and childish. When radfems resort to name calling and commenting on appearance, we should be calling each other on it, because we actually have analysis. We don't need to, get into name calling and slurs and making comments about the way in which people look, whether we like the way they look or dislike the way they look. I mean, that bullshit should be reserved for people who don't have a real argument. So, yeah, I would say we need to call each other out on that. And, the Conservatives didn't deserve to have that kind of a response. The other thing that Tasha said was women had said she was under the thumb of her husband and was just mouthing off his opinions as opposed to talking her own. Well, I've been listening to what she has to say for a couple of years now, not on YouTube, but on Facebook. And I would say she comes across as perfectly capable of speaking for herself and doesn't seem to come across as being under the thumb of her husband either. She is a conservative. She used to be a radical feminist. that's how I came to find out who she was just through radical feminist circles. And watching her, change very quickly from radical feminist to right-wing conservative has been a very interesting thing to watch, if not a bit disturbing. So that was all I listened to. They may have said a lot more than that, but I just wanted to respond to what they were saying in the first half of their podcast. And I am going to put the link into the Google Hangouts now, into the description box, which will be the link to the Google Hangouts. So that will turn up in about, hopefully 5-10 seconds, so people can join in. Where are we? Okay, so I've now got to pull this up. Okay, where are we? Goodness me. Sorry, I'm having navigational issues to make sure that this did, in fact, turn up in the description box so people can join in the Hangout. Here we go. Yes, it's there. So I will also now put it into the top chat, or yeah, I think it's got two different names, live chat and top chat. I'm not sure which one you'll be seeing. And there it is. It's finally come up. So that was the stuff on the Kavanaugh post. The other two things that I wanted to raise today, one of them was that Queensland had a massive win. Abortion has been decriminalised in Queensland, finally. And, it took long enough. Oh, goodness, somebody's asking me to send them the link personally. So I will try and find them. There they are. Okay. There we go. That link's been sent. So, yeah, finally, we have decriminalised abortion in Queensland. And in the same week, what's happened, we have had a 12-year-old girl get attacked randomly by what we think is an 18-year-old boy, because he hasn't been apprehended. Actually, I shouldn't say boy. At 18, it's a young man. And he wasn't a school kid. He looked to be working in the area because he was wearing what looked to be work clothing. And he had a box cutter, started slashing at her face. And they believe that there was around 20-ish cuts. This is with box cutters. If you've ever seen them, they're extremely sharp and dangerous. And she was in a school uniform, walking under in a tunnel under a train tracks, just going to school. And he attacked her for no reason. He said nothing. They have no contact.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Who am I got here? Felicity.
Yeah, Hannah or Felicity, either way.
I'll go with your YouTube name, because
cool.
way, if anybody else joins us, then I can actually just go down and read if I forget the names of people.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. How are you feeling?
A little bit sore, yeah. For those who don't know, I had surgery yesterday, and yeah, I'm actually not on painkillers, but I was actually going to discuss that, because I thought the light switch moment went off for me when I realized that the pain I'm experiencing post-surgery isn't as bad as menstrual cramping. Yet, when I've gone into a doctor and said I'm having major problems with menstrual cramping, it's been like, oh, yeah, that's terrible, isn't it? Oh, you should buy some Voltaren. They never ask, what's your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? But post-surgery, they're asking those questions. So,
yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? Like, it's just, typical of the establishment, the sort of medical establishment that's like, Oh, yeah. If a good woman comes in and goes, about any complaints whatsoever, it's like take a Panadol, have a lie down. But if a guy goes in and goes, "Oh, I'm in a lot of pain," they go, "Oh, we should, admit you somewhere." Um, so it's like kind of funny that way.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why the sort of I had that light bulb kind of thing go off. It was like, look, I've known this in theory for a long time that pain is not taken as seriously if you're black, brown, or female. And if you happen to be a black female or a brown female, it's doubly discounted. Yet when I realized that my post surgery pain wasn't as bad as basic female problems pain, that's when I went, hang on, how many women have actually gone through hell pain that's beyond that of post surgery and being discounted as, oh, yeah, it's just women's problems?
Yeah, yeah, I would have absolutely no idea
Yeah.
how many women. I'm sure if we went on a train right now and surveyed every woman on the carriage and said, "Look, have you ever had this happen to you?" I think every one of them would say yes. I think it's a very, very, very common thing to happen.
Mm, yeah. And I wonder if women know just how bad it is because, not everybody will be able to have that comparison going on at the same time.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah,
This
so
is
did you hear the first
true.
15 minutes of this live stream?
What do you mean? Like, what should we talk about first or something?
Oh, I was just asking if you'd been listening to the first 15 minutes or not.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. Well, I was discussing Illusions Destroyed and just giving a kind of response to a podcast that they put out about radical feminists. And, they were doing the whole radical feminists are baby killers because they're pro abortion. And, they're all crazy. And it was a woman who used to be a radical feminist who turned conservative in the last 2 years who was saying, they're all crazy, and that's what made her leave. So it was a very interesting thing to watch because Illusions Destroyed themselves were the ones who invited me to listen to their podcast. And really, really funny because I wouldn't have known otherwise. Um,
Yeah.
we did a response to one of their videos once here, and that was on Kavanagh and Ford. And
Uh,
I don't know if you know much about that case or not.
oh, yeah, I followed it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, they were saying, there's, Ford never said that Kavanagh had raped her. And we were talking about it as rape culture. And the thing about conservatives is they don't believe rape culture exists because they only equate it with overt statements of, like what Tasha said in this podcast. Oh yeah, America just loves rape, and she said it as a sarcastic thing, of course. So
Yeah.
maybe one of the things we could do is discuss what constitutes rape culture.
Well, that's a great question because I think maybe younger um, radfems and older radfems may have a different perspective on what that actually is. Um, for me, anyway, I sort of would define rape culture as a culture that puts the blame on the victim um, and then accepts it through the dominant culture. So, when we have situations where you have a rapper or someone like that rapping about, raping that woman or something like that, and then, no one blinks an eye, because it's just so like, who cares? and then it's sort of shifting the blame from the man to the woman. And I think like that kind of is what I would define rape culture. So like statements, for example, like, oh, what was she wearing? And then sort of putting that into a dominant culture, like, you know, in a song or a movie or something like that, that sort of shows that idea of what was she doing, and making it kind of socially acceptable. You know, I would define that as rape culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add into it is just the complete lack of repercussions, even when found guilty.
Yeah.
You know, and not just in rape itself, but in violent crimes against women and girls, whether they involve sex or don't involve sex. Like, you know, Tassie had two cases this week. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't in Tasmania, it was Canberra. Trying to get my locations correct here to, you know. But one of them was a woman ripped off 10 different men online through a dating app to the tune of around $300,000 all up. And she is serving 2 years in jail and has to pay the $300,000 back to the men she ripped off. And in the same week, we had a woman who was kidnapped and tortured, and the man serving no jail time after being found guilty, because that he said that he was doing it as part of helping her with drug rehab, as if being tortured is going to get you off drugs. So, you know, that sort of shows you that a man being ripped off financially is perceived as a worse crime than a woman being kidnapped and tortured. That to me is part of rape culture, even though no actual rape occurred in this. It is the perception of the female body as worth less than a man's wallet, let alone his actual body. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I still think that is sort of the stuff from, you know, that is sort of brainwashed into the populace about, you know, what is acceptable. For example, like, you know, in you know, the media and in the general culture, from when we're young and we're kids, we're sort of always told that, like, you know, to bash up a dog or a cat or something is horrific. You know, you don't want to hurt animals and anything. And so
Yeah.
when you hear on the news that, you know, someone has lit a dog on fire or something, you're absolutely horrified. Um,
Yeah.
but in music and in hip hop and rap and other sort of genres, and in movies and in games and stuff, we have this narrative all of the time that, like, you know, even female rappers are starting to sort of say about, you know, wagging your tush and you know, all of this sort of stuff, that what it does is it sort of then promotes this idea that when we hear about in the news that, you know, a woman was attacked, it's not like, oh, you know, in the same way that you hear about, you know, some cruelty to animals, because it's just like all of the time we're being cultured into the idea that violence against women is like fun, or it's hip, or it's cool, or it's like, who cares? And I think that's like the double standard in things like white ribbon, or things like the violence against women thing, because it's just like, you know, violence against women, Australia says no, which was a slogan I was brought up with. Um, but then, you know, on the other hand, we have a government right now that is like saying, oh, well, there's no sexism in the Liberal Party, and, you know, women need to just toughen up. So which is it? You know, is it, are we saying no? Or are we saying to women actually in Australia, like, toughen up, buttercup kind of thing?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
that double standard.
Oh, yeah. And we also have so many images of women in a dissected kind of way. So, you know, if the very first step of dehumanizing somebody is to dissect them, you know? So you'll get an advert that shows a woman being used as a coffee table or a footrest or, things like that. You'll get ads that zero in on the butt or the thighs or, and you don't see the whole person. And this is a way of dehumanizing the whole sex, not just that one person.
Oh, yes, I completely agree. Um, and then we want to also um, get those sorts of things and, make it an action as well, like, the amount of times, I've heard or seen things like, oh, make me that sandwich bitch, it's like that kind of action that, you're only able to do rather than this conversation we have around men and when boys are growing up that they can do everything that they want and they can go off and have and do whatever job they want or go into whatever uni degree they want, but women are sort of told like, oh yeah, you can kind of go to uni and you can do all of that and good on you, but then you get to like 26 and on to your 30s and your doctors and everyone is like saying, oh come on, hurry up, your body clock's going. So it's like the society goes, oh yes, it's great that you want to get an education, but then at the other time it's just like, well, maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should I don't know, find a guy and get a kid going and start breeding. So it's like, it's that kind of double standard that I think a lot of young, like women my age, are feeling quite strongly because I'm 24 in a few weeks, and already there are so many like forces, not from family or anything, but sort of forces of saying, oh come on, your body clock's ticking. Um, and I'm only like 24, like soon. So I can't imagine what the atmosphere will be like when I'm sort of 30.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was like in my early 30s being asked, so why didn't you ever have kids? And I said, well, I still can. Um, and I said
Mm-hmm.
now as well. Um, and I'm in my early 40s now. So it's a kind of ridiculous thing because, we've got science now that's actually showed that for women, the differential in difficulty to get pregnant at different ages is actually the age of their partner, not them. With women, the eggs, we're born with all of the eggs that we need. And, they stay at the same quality the whole time. It just switches itself off at menopause, you know? Um,
Mm.
Men, it's the sperm that has more mutations as they get older, and that starts right at the age of 18.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But there's no like sort of thing with guys like, oh, are you really sure you want to go to uni? You should find a girl and start reproducing. But for women, it's like, oh, it's great that you want to be independent and get an education and good for you. But then you finish your degree and it's not like, oh, what job do you want? It's like, oh, have you thought about having kids?
Yeah,
So it's like this sort of really odd thing that women are sort of expected to be strong and independent and all of that sort of stuff. But once you reach like 25, you should submit yourself to men and start breeding and start making sandwiches. So
yeah,
it's just like you may as well just tell women or girls in primary school even like, oh, don't worry about education, because it's like it's a huge double mean it's a huge double standard. um and particularly when you're studying a very high skilled profession, it must drive women who are doing medicine or law or something like that crazy, that they're like intelligent and strong and willing and very capable, and yet they're being told, like, instead of being lifted up about how amazing they are, they're just like told, oh, that's really great, oh, when are you having kids? So, it drives me insane. And it goes back to that sort of objectification of women. It's like, you have one job, you're a breeder,
And it's reducing a woman to her bodily function and what she can give, men, really.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And it's like there's a whole heap of stuff around what women must be like who choose not to have children. They must hate kids or be cold or, they must be career oriented, or chasing money or something like that. We don't have the equivalent of men who choose not to have kids. It's just a simple choice for them. There's no attached personality traits that are, viewed in a negative light.
Yeah, like, I've never had sort of the desire to have kids. Like, I have more of a desire to have like 20 German Shepherds than like, a kid. So, I think, there is an issue there, because you're right. Women who don't want to have kids is like, oh my goodness, you look like a Martian or something.
Mm.
But men who don't want to have kids, like, oh look, you just want to be a bachelor and you want to sort of not be held down. It's a freeing thing, it's a liberation thing for them. But with women, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like you're not doing the only thing that you were born to do, kind of thing, rather than a choice.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's really any way for a woman to have children under patriarchy in a liberated manner. There could be outside of it, but within it, there's a whole heap of rules and judgment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And also the, women who can't have kids, like physically can't have kids, have also huge amounts of issues, because, to be told when you're a woman that you can't have children is like a huge problem. And then when people say, oh, why are you having kids? And you've got to explain this like really painful thing that you've been told, or something, and then it becomes a huge issue. But when a guy is just like, oh look, I'm unable to like do his part, it's like, oh, you poor thing, like, oh my goodness, you can't enjoy sex. But with women, it's like, oh, it's almost like an inconvenience to the person asking, kind of thing. Like, it's just like, oh no, I'm so, like, oh, that's shocking, like, oh, how can I recover, kind of thing. I don't know if I've just felt that.
Hi, Laurie.
Hello.
Okay, so we can hear something in the background there. Oh, yeah, you switched it off. Great. So I don't know if you've been listening so far to what we've been saying.
Yeah, I've heard a bit of it. I had forgotten you guys were on today, which is why I'm in my pajamas.
So we can hear something in the background there.
At my place?
You might need to switch that on pause or something. I don't know if you've been listening. So there we go. That's
okay.
Better. Yeah, so we were just talking about rape culture and all the different things that go into it, and it drew back to women's reproductive capacity and the expectation that if you can, then you must, and you should want to, as being part of that rape culture, because it puts women down to what our bodies are capable of producing for men, rather than a life of our own.
Well, I look, men are intellect and women are bodies is kind of the basic duality. So of course, the only thing that we're really good at, unless of course we're a freak of nature, is, being physical and doing what our bodies are best able to do that men's are not able to do at all, which is to bear young. So yeah, there's a lot of different things happening there. I don't have kids. I've never wanted kids, but then being a lesbian, it hasn't really been the issue for me that I think it is for a lot of heterosexual women. But yeah, my mother, I heard you guys talking about, you know, you know, you're getting to a certain age and the biological clock is ticking. Well, my father died when I was young. And so my mother's thought was that because I was very smart and had very good grades, that I should go to university. Not because I would necessarily make that my life's work, whatever I've happened to study, but it would be a good thing to fall back on. So, and I know that's not necessarily the case now for a lot of younger women, especially because we have a economy that requires essentially 2 adults in the workforce in order to have enough money to raise a family. So that's changed too. But yeah, there's a lot of things going on there. Yes, very much so. And single women are very much still demonized as, you know, burdens on society, and as if, you know, my thought on younger people, and I have nieces and I have younger people in my life, is that when I'm going to be at that point where I'm completely dependent, they're going to be the ones who are going to keeping society ticking over. So I'm more than happy to see all of the resources go into them and to not treat any child, any person for any reason as a burden on society. Because the more we put into children collectively, the more we take that on as a collective responsibility, the more we'll benefit from that. Even just, you know, if you want to talk crass dollars, the more people make, the better that they've got the economy ticking over, the better we'll be able to support someone like me when I'm old and decrepit.
Yeah, and the truth is, most women, no matter whether they've been in a lifelong partnership, whether they're straight or lesbian, most women outlive, you know, a partner.
Yes, true.
And most women will end up being considered that, you know, older, burdensome, you know, burden on society. So, yeah, we do need to break down that and say, no, you know, nobody being alive is a burden on society, because everybody's given or will give at some point.
Yeah, like I'm a assistant nurse, and for the American, a CNA, and I work in aged care, and it's really sad because often it's more likely, actually, I've observed that in aged care it's far more likely for an elderly gentleman to be more assertive about, you know, what he needs care with, but a woman will tend to say, oh, look, don't worry about me, love, like, go to the next person. So even in old age, you know, women sort of are apologizing for needing help, and sort of saying, look, don't worry about me. And the older guys will say, actually, love, I would really like a cup of coffee, or can you straighten my bed out, or can you do this? But older women will say, oh, look, I don't really need to go to the loo right now. Can you come back to me when you can? Or so it's like that sort of like selflessness of, like, you know, even at that age, it's
well, and unfortunately, even though the vast majority of people working in aged care are women, you still have that, because women are deferential to men, that when a worker is being asked to serve an older man in some way, shape, or form, most of the time their mentality is like, oh, well, he's, you know, worked his whole life. He you know, he deserves it, or yeah, sure, whatever. Whereas old women are, even by women, viewed as burdensome. And again, you see that even intergenerationally within families, there's just this notion that once, as a woman, you've reached menopause, and if you're not either still raising your own children or providing fairly full-time nanny services for your grandchildren, then you're pretty not much, you know, past your use-by date. Whereas obviously, one of the reasons that humans are one of the rare animals that actually we live past menopause, we live past our reproductive age, is that it takes that sort of extra pair of hands. It takes that extra knowledge. It takes that mother who's been there and been through pregnancy to see her daughters and even her granddaughters through pregnancy. And again, so much of that women's knowledge has been taken away from us here in the West and medicalized. So, you know, what good are we at that point? And it's got a lot of different things happening. Excuse me a second. I'm going to go grab my patty.
Yeah, I think there's also this expectation that if you're the caregiver, that you're not meant to receive care. So, you know, women who have spent their entire lives, you know, raising kids, looking after the house, looking after the husband, having a part-time job on top of that, or maybe even having periods of full-time work with part-time work, switching between them. You know, they've constantly put other people first. They've constantly said, you know, I've got to take care of my family, of my workplace, and then the last thing I take care of is myself. If you have a lifetime of that thinking, then
yes,
I don't think you're likely to change, you know, the way of thinking just because you're now in a position where you do need help.
Well, look at me here. I don't have kids, but there's the mothering role, and there's something about it. And it's even amongst the wires, amongst the caregiving network, it's almost all women. You know, there's something very and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think there's something about keeping your hand in to the cycle of life. And that doesn't mean necessarily somebody needs his bottle. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to always put yourself last, but it gets framed that way. But I think there is something that we have really lost in terms of valuing nurturing.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, because like I'm 24 in a week, and even I think like buying flowers is too much of a responsibility to keep them alive. So, you know, I have absolutely no want to care for anything, except for maybe a beautiful German Shepherd. Maybe I would change my view towards that. But the issue is that I think, you know, there is this sort of that's something also like I have an issue with, is that the idea that femininity means to want to care and want to be there for others. I think it's like that kind of push. I think maybe it's a younger radical feminist thing, a pushback against that whole like, oh, you know, just because I'm, you know, a woman, it doesn't mean that I have to be there for anyone if I don't want to be.
Well, and certainly no one should. But on the other hand, I do worry that in the whole equality feminism and choice feminism has to a large degree meant women becoming more like men in order to be valued by a very masculinist society. And I don't think that's necessary. I'm not saying that we all need to be like Earth mothers. I'm rather saying that there are skills and there are things that we can do as, you know, either males or females that involve caring. And it's only because we've devalued caring that, well, and also because it's linked to women's bodies with lactating and pregnancy and all, but that we've basically created this intersection whereby which, because women do it, it's devalued, and because it's devalued, women do it.
Oh, I completely agree there. Like, I'm no objectification on that. But like, what I'm sort of saying is that, like, if a woman, you know, who freely, I'll re-say that word, freely decides that she, you know, maybe wants to have a child or something like that, then that's absolutely fine. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. But there's an often thing in like the normal sort of based society and in the culture that is like kind of the expecting of women to take up that responsibility, rather than that idea of like, look, you know, if you want to have kids, you want to have kids. If you don't, you don't. Like, it's no, it shouldn't be a big deal for a woman of my age to say, yeah, I'm not like wanting to have kids at all.
Oh, no, not at all. And truth be told, and a lot of people find this a bit shocking when I, as a woman, say it, I don't really think we need any more humans on this planet. We certainly are about to lose well over 1 billion and possibly several billion in terms of the Earth's carrying capacity. The thing about climate change is that humans have plunked ourselves down and built our infrastructure where there's been rain and good topsoil, and the rain is going to move, and the seasons are going to change, and we're not going to be able to just peel off all that infrastructure and, you know, take it another 1,000 feet up the hillside where it's a little bit cooler. So we're really at a point where everything that we've done that has allowed us to have as many people on the planet as we currently do is going to be stressed to the point where, like I said, our carrying capacity for human life is going to be greatly diminished. The snowpack in the Himalayas right now is getting to the point where the Ganges, we're talking, you know, close to 1 billion people who are dependent upon this particular runoff from the Himalayas. There's not going to be enough ice pack such that Mother Ganges will run dry. And that's unheard of. And how are we going to cope? And the fact is, we're not going to cope. And so I do have a somewhat anti-natalist viewpoint. And again, if you want to have kids, I'm not going to say don't. I'm just saying that times ahead are going to be very fraught. And there are plenty of people on the planet that need our love and attention without necessarily popping out our own sprugs.
Yeah, like I actually will agree with most of that. I'm sort of a fan of people, particularly in the West more so, but instead of having our own kids, we should be adopting, and we should actually be taking kids that have been neglected in some way. If women who want to have kids, I think, is a far more humanist approach to have, rather than, you know, creating more. You know, there are plenty of children who need love and care and a safe environment. And I think that's a far better option maybe sometimes.
I think we also have to realize that nuclear families are very recent, that we really have raised children in extended families and villages and whatnot. And again, all of these, living here in Australia, and you get all these people here that's like, oh, well, you know, I couldn't adopt because it's really hard to adopt there, and it's really hard to adopt between countries where we live. And it's like, if you really wanted to have a kid, if you really desperately wanted to have a kid, I would personally, if I felt that strongly about it, I would consider moving to India. That child could stay within their larger family, their larger culture, all of those things. Whereas here we think, oh, well, I couldn't possibly give up my lifestyle, but it's okay if I take a kid from some poor brown people and bring them here, and oh, won't that be better for them? And it's like, I have issues there too. I mean, I'm not against adoption, but I just think that we have such a very short memory about what it means to be part of families and parents and even children, that it's really hard for me to say, well, oh, well, if you want kids, you should adopt, or yeah, like I said, it's been very fraught for me in some ways, because I do have friends who've all had their kids, and some of them have had to go through, IVF. They've had to go through certain things, and it's like, they're dead set on being parents, but only within this very narrow way of being in the world, which is to retain all of their Western privileges, and to have kids living, with them and mom and dad and maybe a sibling in what's generally too large of a house. Yeah, it's all of it's very strange to me, because I see other cultures do it so much differently than we do, and our way seems a bit insane to me, because again, I just read this last week that for women in the first year after they give birth, there's actually a 70 times increase in the number of suicides.
Yeah, it's also a racist construct that we have. Our laws are based around the nuclear family unit, which is a white Western way of doing things. Yet, this isn't a solely white Western country, and our laws need to really reflect who lives here. Yeah, and when you look at the conservations and the reservations, and the Aboriginal way of life isn't in the nuclear family unit, it's the extended family. Same as in New Zealand, there's an extended family, and they're not always blood relatives, but the family unit still makes sense. That everyone knows who each other are and where they stand in that family unit. So children know who their parents are. They know who their aunts and uncles are. They know who the neighbours are and the people down the street. And they're safe. They're probably more safe in some ways because they know everyone.
And everyone kind of keeps an eye on them, and it gets back to your parents if you've been being a bit of a rat bag. And there's a lot of dynamics that are going on there. Whereas, I think, like I said, it's very fraught. But back to the very sort of, I think we're all struggling, those of us who identify as radical feminists, with the fact that there has been a really huge backlash against women being accepted in the public sphere. Now, we have to be in the public sphere. We don't have a choice. We have to work. We have to engage. But there's, again, this sort of, there's this, for lack of a better word, an expectation that our primary goal, our primary purpose, our primary reason for being is to make babies. And whether you make babies or not, that I keep getting these things where people are like, well, you're just saying that, women, around the whole trans thing, where, well, what about a woman who doesn't have kids or can't have kids or has menopause? Is she no longer a woman? It's like, no, because I belong to the class of people who have babies, who get pregnant, who carry pregnancies, who can lactate, who produce children from their own body. I belong to that class, whether I ever have a child or not. That class and my being a part of that class shapes the way society views me. Again, it does change if you have kids or not, but you're certainly not privileged if you don't have kids. And you certainly aren't privileged if you do have kids. It's just a different kind of oppression that we put on women who are quote unquote barren versus women who are tied to, the apron strings, or kids tied to the apron strings and such. So yeah, it's just, I'm not sure we'll ever not, nor would I necessarily want us to not have that relationship to gestation and child rearing. I simply want that relationship to be valued in the way that things that men do that are really quite destructive and inane are valued.
Yeah. The thing is that find out that what happens is they've still been brought up in this culture. So before they go through puberty, they're, indoctrinated into the idea that they're going to go to school, meet a man, get married, have children. And it won't matter whether they're, what their orientation is, they've still got this message coming at them. And so to find out they're infertile is actually it's a specifically female experience. It's part of womanhood to go through that experience. So a man transitioning to, then says, well, what about women who can't give birth or who are infertile or barren or whatever wording choice they use? Trying to compare the expectation that, of course, you should be able to, with no expectation that you should be able to because you don't have the right plumbing. There's no comparison there in the first place. And that's the same with what about women who have gone through menopause? Menopause is a female experience. Only women can go through it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, we look at the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Okay, those are the traditional, like Wicca, but also pagan. A lot of cultures make that distinction that we are childbearing, and post-childbearing, and men don't have that. There's sort of youth, and then there's adult, and there's been a lot. Mary Daly, a lot of writers have written about how the whole Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the trium. That's not the word I'm looking for. The Trinity. That in so many Western religions, there's actually 3 parts to their deity, or the religious. Again, not saying this very well, but and that predates patriarchy, and that much as patriarchal cultures have come in and appropriated pre-patriarchal beliefs and folded them into their belief system, that a lot of things that we have like that speak back to a time when women were recognized for the 3 stages and the 3 contributions that we gave to our societies at those 3 different stages of our lives.
Yeah.
Well, I think I guess I'm just going to annoy everyone right now because and I only say that with love, to be honest, but in that I'm actually a religious Rad fan. And I, try and I guess look at the scope of how religion actually, how I interpret my faith, bearing in mind that there are denominations and there are preachers and a history, and I totally understand that have all had very sexist interpretations of scripture and of faith and teaching and all that sort of stuff. But when I think about who my Christ and stuff, I don't see an oppressor. I actually see a teacher that actually said to one of the men his disciples went up to him and said, this is in the Bible, and said, oh, Jesus, I've had lust in my heart over this woman. What are you going to do to her? And Jesus turned around and said, well, why don't you cut out your own eyes? So it actually was a story about actually sort of saying it's not her fault, and leave her be, which was a huge radical change in the old idea that was like, oh, look, you've lusted after a woman, oh, well, we better stone her. So I think there is different interpretations of scripture, and I understand that there is a long history of sexism and a huge history of misogyny within the church. But at the same time, I think that there can be a huge idea of liberation as well. It's not all kind of like, oppressive, but I do understand there is a history.
Oh, well, interestingly enough, Until the Council of Nicaea from
Has Laurie dropped out?
Okay, this appears to have dropped out.
Yeah, I'm still here.
You're still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Laurie looks frozen on the screen to me, so I can't hear what she's saying. Or can you hear her or see?
No, I can't see her or hear her.
Okay. Right, so it looks like the stream's okay. It may be something wrong at Laurie's end that's causing that. That's unfortunate because I was actually kind of enjoying listening to it. Okay. So we were talking about, religion. Back in the 90s, I actually knew feminist Christians who they went to church, but they also they had a separate group where they would meet once a week, and they reinterpreted their beliefs, looking at it from a feminist lens through a woman's gaze. And I found it very interesting that they were doing this because I thought it needs to be done. And I don't know what's happened, with that group because I kind of lost contact after I moved city. And just wondering if you've heard of women doing this.
Doing what? Sorry.
Reinterpreting the Bible through women's gaze, through a feminist lens.
Oh, sure. There's like liberation theory, and there's an outlook of Jesus actually liberating women, or there is a sort of a great emphasis on Mary, maybe, or there's all of that sort of stuff. There's actually a whole, conversation within, I guess, Catholicism around, looking at Mary's role far more than Jesus's. So it can be multifaceted, and it depends on like what interpretation and what church you belong to.
Right.
So I can't really say, oh, look, it's cut and dry, because like Catholicism and Christianity more broadly is so mucky. You know, Protestants have their view, and Catholics have their view, and Orthodoxes have their view, and then within that, even there's different interpretations from different bishops or priests or the Pope for different views. So I can't really say that there's an authority or there is like this feminist outlook, because there's a lot of Catholics might even say, look, they're very pro women's liberation, but some Protestants might say, actually no, we believe in traditional gender roles, or so it all really depends on the teacher. And that's why I think as of late I stopped going to church, and I don't go and to a particular denomination anymore. I know Christ, and I know who he is to me, and that's sort of all that matters. And I think that's also a different way of devotion. I know a few youth friends of mine who are Christians who used to go to church every Sunday have kind of stopped going because it's just become too controversial or too oppressive when you're a lefty and you're a Christian, because you believe in, say, things like gay marriage, or you believe in liberation for women, or you believe in all of this stuff, but then you're going to church and you're hearing a priest say something you really, really disagree with. So a lot of my friends who are Christians have actually started to boycott the church, but still maintain their faith in Jesus, and would far rather catch up with a group of their friends or other people that they might know that believe in Jesus, and they might catch up at the pub, and then they just talk about the Bible or Christ in that way, rather than actually going to church. So there's been a huge change in the way youth are worshipping, which is an interesting thing to look at, really.
Yeah, it is, because it obviously means that there is an alienation from the organization rather than from the belief system itself. And the idea of, not separating out women from men and going into traditional roles, that idea is being broken down.
Yeah, and I, have friends who are, gay and Catholic, or who, are non-Zionist Jews, or who are breaking down a lot of the misconceptions about, each faith. And I think that that's really important, because for a really, really long time, it's sort of the idea that Catholics have a lot of kids and the women are so oppressed, and then, Jews are, really, insular, and they don't really interact with anyone. And this is like, the stereotypes. But a lot of young people who are, into faith and love their God and love what they believe in are actually starting to sort of say, actually, let's talk about what it is to be, Christian or gay, or let's talk about what it is to be a left-wing Catholic, or what does the church actually mean now in the 21st century, rather than this discussion of things that happened in like Vatican II, or this debate with that Pope, or whatever it is. So a lot of young people in faith are actually coming and saying, look, yes, there is a lot of things that we need to sort of start talking about, but for now, let's like focus on what our faith means to us as individuals, rather than this conversation that's been a thing for a really long time about like we're Christian or we're Jewish, so therefore we've got to sort of agree to a certain idea. Now it's sort of flipping on its head. A lot of young people are actually saying, look, how do we get the church, or how do we get our faith to match our lifestyle, rather than the other way around?
Yeah, I've got a question for you, because I don't have any kind of religious faith, but You know how the archetype of most religions is male? They
Yes.
say it's neither male or female, but the archetypal imagery is always of he, him, father, male.
Yeah.
As a feminist and somebody who is religious, how do you how do you overcome that, or how does that sit with you? How do you feel about it?
I'll controversially say I think it's okay, and the reason why it's okay is that I don't see God or the Father or Him or Lord as like this oppressant, omniscient dictator. I see, when I say that I love Him, or that he is the Father, I sort of see him as that like dream father figure that every person has, that loving, caring, protective, um, peak kind of father figure, rather than an oppressive, judgmental, disciplinarian father figure. So I think that's also a different way in viewing it. And so, when I sort of pray and I say, dear Father, or, whatever the word I might use, and when I say at the end of prayers that I might have, in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I'm not talking about, a omniscient, male, not a sexist one, but actually a liberator, a male that, that cares, or a male that wraps his arms around you and says, it's going to be okay, rather than a, scary kind of guy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. For me, it's very difficult because I don't perceive in that manner. I sort of, I look at religions where they've got the male archetype, and it's very off-putting to me. Whereas, having personal beliefs in a sort of more agnostic style fashion, I like to base it mostly on science, to be honest, the place where physics and metaphysics meet. And for me, it just becomes energy. And energy isn't even necessarily personified. It's something that, we've got examples of measurable energy, such as radio waves, microwaves, things like that. And so where physics then meets metaphysics, it's like, well, we haven't proven X, Y, Z, but there's indication scientifically that X, Y, Z exists. So it will become proven one day. And I find that kind of spirituality a lot easier because it takes out male and female, masculine, feminine. It removes personhood.
Yeah. I think it's it's a just, but the thing is, like, that also raises the thing that you can't be religious and believe in science. Like, I'm an evolutionist, and I believe in evolution, and I believe in science, and I believe in, that's why I'm a communist. So it's not necessarily a cut and dry thing of like, oh, if you believe in God, then obviously, you hate science and you don't want to have a bar of it, or sometimes, people who are, atheists talking about a lot of political issues, I'll agree with far more. But sometimes when it comes to morals and sort of value sort of stuff, then I sort of will agree with people who are religious far more. So it all sort of depends on the question. And I think a lot of young people are actually saying, look, we believe in science, and we believe we're not creationists, or we're not people who believe that God made the world in exactly 7 days, or we don't believe in any of that, but we do believe that there is a higher power, and actually it's a smart idea that if he exists, you should, kind of, live your life in that way, because, when you die, you know, you're on the upper hand if you have believed in him. It's like a Pascal wager thing. So
that sounds to me like hedging your bets. Yeah. And look, I've always argued that I would do what I think is right, whether or not there is a heaven or a hell, or I'm going to be judged someday. That, to me, the argument that people make between religion and ethics, to me, is almost kind of backwards, because I believe that if you do what you believe is right, and you do it even if you were going to be punished, if you do it even in the absence of any praise or any reward, to me, that's actually a stronger sense of morality. And I do say this coming from an evangelical Christian background, where they just cannot grasp the idea that how could you risk going to hell for all eternity? Wouldn't you, isn't it at least better to believe? Because that way, you know, like I said, you've hedged your bets. And that makes no sense to me. I do what I do. I am what I am. And I do it because it makes the most moral and ethical sense to me.
Can I, I'm not cutting out or anything, but I just really need the loo. I'll be back.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I understand what you were saying there, Laurie, because, you know, I've heard people say, well, what if you're wrong? What if there is a God? You know, won't you be terribly disappointed? And, you know, I think, well, okay, I've got my own ethics and morals based on what well, for me, it's based on human rights, and I believe everybody deserves human rights. So I don't feel like I can go wrong no matter what the outcome turns into.
I think very interesting, because, again, I've lived in most of my life in the U.S., and I would get these very very right-wing sort of Christian types who would be like, well, you know, what if God came down and, you know, tomorrow, and then do you believe? And I'd be like, well, what if you know, ISIS came down tomorrow, then would you believe? And they'd be all like, but that can't happen because ISIS is a myth and God is God. And it's like, well, you see where I'm getting with this.
Yeah, I do get where you're coming from. You know, part of having some kind of belief system, which, you know, I sort of loosely say agnostic, but I think it's more science-based, is just admitting I really don't actually know. You know, when we die, we'll find out. And if there's nothing to find out.
I mean, you know, isn't that kind of the whole idea of believing in the absence of knowing? Yeah, you can. I was going to say, you can watch him. He's a lot cuter.
Oh, yeah. So, what is that you're holding there? Because I've only got the tiny little thumbnail.
Oh, okay, that his name is Louis. He is a Tasmanian paddymmelon, which is the smallest of the macropods. So you've got the kangaroos, the wallabies, you know, wallaroos, and then way down at the bottom and the paddymmelons.
Right.
Yeah. So he's just a teeny tiny little member of the kangaroo family. And unfortunately, Tasmania is called the roadkill state for a reason. We have a very healthy wildlife populations here, except for obviously with devils and a few of the ones that aren't doing so well. And we have roads that come right up to the bush, and it's very hilly and windy and everything here. And it's not like Melbourne where you can just see forever and it's flat as a flitter, and that, you know, there aren't any kangaroos living close to the population centers. Here we have people, you know, you can be down in South Hobart and see a pattymellon or a wallaby. And so anyways, we end up with a lot of these little guys in care because mom gets hit and they need somebody to take care of them for a few months. So, right. Yeah. So it's just something I do because I'm physically disabled and I spend a lot of time at home. And it's, you know, something I enjoy doing.
Right. Yeah, I have done snake rescue before.
Oh, excellent. I love snakes.
Yeah, I don't deal with the venomous ones at all. I've only ever handled the non-venomous, you know, python varieties. But, you know, when we've had bushfires and floods and, you know, the warnings coming in, then we try to evacuate some of the local wildlife. And then, of course, there's, you know, cleaning up afterwards. And a lot of the time, especially with bushfires, they come into the cities for water. And so then you need to, you know, house them for a bit until you can put them back in the wild. So I've done that on a few occasions now, and mostly in Queensland, but a couple of times in Melbourne.
Unfortunately, we only have 3 snake species here, and they are all poisonous, or venomous, I should say. And one's tiny, and so you're not likely to get bit just because it's that small. And the other 2 are members of the greater cobra family, and they're pretty. They can be pretty aggressive, so you don't want to mess with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think most snakes can be pretty aggressive. I mean, you've got a few that are a little bit dopey and you can get around them. But yeah, this is why, you know, the hooks and the cages and all that kind of stuff get used when we go in. But I've often found with the, you know, basic carpet pythons, they're dopey as hell and a bit stupid. So it's actually easier to go up behind them and just scoop them up with hands. And then they wrap around you and think you're a tree. It's, you know, they really are quite stupid things.
I used to catch snakes in the U.S. quite a lot just because I've always had livestock and ducks and geese and whatnot, and they'll get in the chook house, they'll get in with the birds and cause quite a kerfuffle. So you have to go out there and remove somebody. But in the U.S., again, you pretty much only have the rattlers, the pit vipers, the cottonmouths, that sort of thing in terms of venomous. And then there's just a ton of others. And as long as you're pretty decent at handling them, you're pretty safe. So I've quite used to doing that in the U.S., but not here. Like I said, the ones here, they're way up there in terms of the venomous species.
Yeah.
So definitely, yes, you're just a little rat bag tonight, aren't you? They're just like kids. Some days they're just all chill and they just want to hang out with you, and other days they're like, nah.
Yeah, what I found really interesting with doing the you know, program of snake rescue is you expect it to be all these blokes, and it turns out to be like 2 or 3 blokes running the show, and almost all of the people who are volunteering are women.
Yeah, the volunteers here definitely are, and my local, the woman whose card I have on my refrigerator, just in case, you know, I should ever need to call somebody out in an emergency, and she does charge for call outs, but yeah, the snake lady, as she calls herself. So yeah, one of the few professional snake handlers in my area is a woman. And again, in terms of the WIRES network, the wildlife network, I would say we're probably a good 90% women doing the caring, and that, you know, it's anything from reptiles to amphibians to we've even had penguins in care because we get penguins down here. So yeah, there's people who specialize in bats, there's raptors, you name it. If there's a essentially an animal class, there's probably somebody down here who is trained or has gathered their own experience over the years in order to be able to take care of them if they're injured, or again, most of ours are just youngsters who need a little bit of time before they can be turned back out into the wild.
Yeah. So, over there, do you have people in paid positions? Got some feedback going on here. I'm not sure why I'm hearing myself 3 seconds after I've said something, but I am. It's putting me off the sentences a little. But, you know, with the paid positions that I've been a part of, where I've been a volunteer, it's almost always been a man in that position. Well, 90% of the organisations are female.
Well, that's true of almost all volunteer organizations. Almost any place, any volunteer organization I've been a part of, no matter what the nature of it was, the vast majority of the actual volunteers are women, and the staff positions tend to have a much greater proportion of men. We're lucky here because we have Bonarong Wildlife Center, and it's actually not too far from me. And they have the coordination for the entire southern half of the state. They have their own animal wildlife hospital. So there's kind of the people who work there who are paid to be members of the staff at Bonarong. And then they help coordinate the volunteers through there.
Right.
So, and that's kind of, I'd say it's maybe 50-50, maybe just a smidge more women than men working at Bonarong. So yeah, they actually have a lot of people, like a lot of touristy places in Australia. They have people that come in from overseas and will work for them part-time during the summer or that sort of thing. And obviously they're not so much part of the wildlife care, and they're more like just keeping the park ticking over. But we do have, I think I've seen 3 or 4 of their vets there with charges of mine, and I think all but 1 were women. So yeah.
Gosh.
Somebody's eating my hair, which is another thing he likes to do.
Oh, naughty little thing.
Obviously, one of the things they have to do is get their guts going. And just like we have to from our mothers. So when they're in the pouch, they're exposed to the bacteria in her saliva from when she cleans out the pouch. And then when they're starting to stick their head out, they'll nibble bits of fecal matter off the ground from where she's feeding. And also just to sort of further inoculate their gut with flora and fauna, they will nibble on their mother's hair. And in my case, he nibbles, or they've all nibbled on mine.
I'm back.
Okay, great.
Sorry
hey, how's
about
it going?
Not bad.
Right.
I'm just coming back to say that I've needing to go and do something. I will catch you on the next one.
Okay, great.
Okay,
have a good
great.
evening.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
See ya.
I just think just to back up a little bit to the whole notion of religion and patriarchal religions. I don't think anybody for me has said it any better than Mary Daly did, and she started out as a feminist theologian. She taught her whole life in a Jesuit university, at least I think she taught her the whole time that she taught there anyways. But the point being is that she said, if God is male, then male is God. And I don't think that because we are humans and because we have notions of male and female, that it is possible, entirely possible, to have a non-sexed, a non-gendered view of a deity. I could be wrong, but from the societies that I have studied, lots of them have male and female, and some of them have sort of hermaphrodites and sort of mixed sex deities. But I think with our current crop of patriarchal religions, the fact that it is God the Father, and it is God is generally referred to as a he, reflects back on the privileged and the elevated state that we give men in society.
Yeah, I don't think you can separate out the he, father, him, son, all of the male references as God from the patriarchal society and culture and the elevation of men in our society. It is because, as you said, or as Mary Daly said, create, and I'll put it in my own words, creating deity as male means that we then end up worshipping men.
Yes, well, they're a higher being. They're a higher order of being simply by sharing that trait with deity, which we don't share with deity.
Yeah, and it's kind of ridiculous anyway. I mean, when you look at the Abrahamic faiths saying that, a male deity gave birth to the world. I mean, and then they also say as above, so below. It's like, well, that's a bit bullshit, isn't it?
Yes. Well, again, like I said, you go back and you look at how Zeus gave birth to Athena out of his thigh, which is a euphemism for penis, or not. He gave birth to her out of his forehead, and I can't remember. I'm not that good on Greek.
Yeah, I thought it was out of his head.
Out of his head. Athena's from his head, and somebody else is from his thigh. Anyways, the point.
Okay.
So Athena is the female warrior goddess who is the goddess of knowledge, right? Because she came from his head, right?
Yeah, and he dreamed her up.
Yeah. Anyways, and again, people have made all sorts of obviously for the longest time and still to some degree in a lot of Christian faiths, priests and pastors and whatnot wore cassocks. They wore dresses. There's all of these things that within religions, they basically stole these things from the pre-patriarchal religions. And then they kind of just ticked over until they didn't really make any sense at all anymore. But originally they were ways of getting the pagans who had certain customs to sort of be able to accept Christianity. I mean, like Thor's hammer was explained to the Northerners as, similar to Christ's cross. And the Yggdrasil, the tree of life. Again, there's all of these things. I liked that when I lived in New Mexico, there were all of these saints that were essentially Mayan or Aztec deities. And, Christianity has been very good at adopting the local customs, the local deities, and folding them back into the Christian faith and in some way, shape, or form. So to me, I look at I look at any religion, and I can see the things that are inconsistent with our current belief system, but are very consistent with pre-patriarchal belief systems.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that the cross itself was actually ripped off from paganism, that it was once an equal cross, and the horizontal line was meant to be God or deity, more to the point, and the vertical line was meant to be humanity. And by shifting it up, put God or the deity over man, whereas it was meant to be deity as equal to man, or
well, again,
equal.
Yeah, there's so many different things there. Okay, the cross can be a dead version of the world tree. Okay, so the Yggdrasil, the Norse god Odin, actually, in order to learn women's religious, again, not phrasing this really well, in order to learn the customs that were only available to the female deities, he actually hung himself. And that by hanging himself, by killing himself, he was able to be initiated into women's knowledge. And that's another version. There's all sorts of different crosses and different, there's probably a ton of different ones that got picked up by Christianity as it encountered different different cultures and religions. I think of it from being an artist and understanding symbolism. There's the notion of the cross, and in fact crucifixion, was to be between heaven and earth. So you weren't raised up high enough to be, of the heavens, but neither were you in contact with earth anymore. So you were literally suspended between realms. Okay. And that was a punishment, because the realms themselves had powers. And so, like I said, there's all sorts of different crosses, different, to me, it's always been very telling that it is a dead, it is dead wood. It's not a living tree. It's not a nature-based religious symbolism. And it's in fact, do you pronounce it gibbet here? It is in fact, I know it's spelled Gibbit, I think. Anyways, I don't know how to pronounce it, but where again, in more modern times and not that long ago here in Australia, that when people were hung, their bodies would be left hanging. And the symbolism of that was, you can't be at rest, you can't be at peace.
Yeah, and as a warning to others.
Yeah, exactly. This too can happen to you. So yeah, anyways, like I said, there's just a lot of symbolism there, and Europe is very much about appropriation. It's very promiscuous. All of the cultures in Europe are very good at coming up against other cultures and other religions and basically borrowing and appropriating and incorporating those cultures. Obviously, it didn't work so well with the natives in Australia, but they didn't have the numbers. Whereas you go to some place like North America, and Hispanic culture is very much about the native cultures of the Southwest and Central America and the European cultures being folded together.
Yeah. Yeah, because when they cross New Zealand, there's very much been an absorption of Maori way of perceiving and, you know, the culture that existed there.
Yes.
And first it was appropriated, it was misused, and to some extent squashed at the same time. And now it's actually coming back with a lot more respect and mutual appreciation rather than oh, sorry, I just had a notice on my computer. Of course, it has to crop up while I'm in the middle of a sentence. Yeah, but yeah, it's coming up now, and as its own culture, separate from, you know, the European culture, and as, I guess, a Kiwi identity. So it's now getting there, or it's starting the process, more to the point. But yeah, that's a very strong example of the colonization and absorption of other cultures.
Yeah, again, I think that happened probably maybe 3 or 4 decades back in the United States with Hispanic culture, in that up until that point, European culture very much dominated. And then there was the 60s, and there was civil rights movements. And then there's the whole notion of la raza, which literally means the race. And la raza describes the cultures that are essentially they are a true American culture, in that it's a little bit of everything. It's what the Europeans brought. It's the Hispanics and their culture, and the Native American cultures all sort of reasserting themselves in some way, shape, or form. And so, yeah, Hispanics in the United States are becoming a much greater percentage of the population. There's no longer the sense of them being a sort of a degraded culture, which I'm afraid you know, people like my mother grew up with. I wasn't allowed to study Spanish when I was in school, because it was seen as sort of a gutter language, because it was spoken by the Mexicans, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, whereas now you'd be, you know, crazy not to study Spanish if you live in the United States, because it's the second largest language in the United States.
Oh,
So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's like I said, it's one of those things where in my lifetime, it's gone from the whole sort of sombrero wearing, you know, peon like character to you know, governors of states, that sort of thing. So yeah, and a pride in its own unique culture, which, as I said, is sort of a hybrid between what was there before and what came after.
All right, that's good. Change. This is something I wasn't aware of at all.
Well, in California, I do believe by, I can't remember the date, I think it's like 2030, it will be a majority Hispanic state.
Right, okay.
And that's one of the 2 largest states in the United States. And so yeah, just as Australia will eventually be a minority Asian culture, North America will be a minority Hispanic culture.
Izzy Carter's just said Australia's second most spoken language is Mandarin, but only 2.5% of the population use it.
Well,
so that's interesting.
One of the most common languages in the world right now, and will be probably the most common language by the end of this century, is what's called Singlish, which is Sino-English, which is to say that there will be more speakers of English with Chinese pronunciations and Chinese grammatical aspects. There will be more of those English speakers than non-Sino-English speakers, and more of those English speakers than Chinese speakers.
Okay. Right. That's new information for me.
Yeah,
I've come across it is Lauren Southern going on about Chinese and English and being afraid of it, you know, because she's coming from a right-wing perspective. English, you know, Southern in Canada.
Yeah, English is the language of the internet. It is the language of technology. It has firmly established itself as the universal language. You know, what used to be called the lingua franca, which meant the French language back when that was the universal language. And it will, simply by virtue of there being more Chinese than anybody else, it will become it will become an Asian language in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, there is more of them than there are of us, and that kind of makes sense because, you know, majority rules when you're looking at, you know, a worldwide internet space.
But if you're interested in it, like I said, it's called Sino-Singlish or Sino-English. Just look it up, and you'll get some really fascinating. And in fact, if you can find audio files, it's really fascinating to listen to it, because you'll listen to it at first and think, I don't understand what's being said. And then if there's a text next to it, once you catch the rhythm of it, then suddenly you can hear all the English words.
Okay, I'm definitely going to look that up. Singlish, how do you, is that just S-I-N-G-L-I-S-H?
Yep.
Okay.
Or like Sino-English. I like language.
Okay, I'll definitely look that up.
I'm trying to relearn Spanish, which is mostly by watching Spanish telenovelas, which are Spanish soap operas.
Right. I'm just having a look in the top chat, and they've been talking about the GRA in there, you know, the Gender Recognition Act in the UK. And apparently women have won. Now, I thought that they were actually still doing the, you know, the consultations up until the 19th. But
yeah,
apparently they've ruled.
Who is saying that? I'm sorry, I don't have the link coming up for the group chat. I've got the...
Oh, okay. Top chat is next to the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got two different things that you can look at. You've got the Hangouts, which is where you know, where we tend to be when we're talking. And then on the video itself to the right is Top Chat. And so where are we? I'm just going back through it. And Mancheese the Great has said, anyone see the recent Guardian article about the GRA? They came out in favour of women and girls having their rights protected. So I haven't seen that. Yeah, and this is apparently from the consultation by the looks of things. And Dr. Kathleen Stock is being interviewed on BBC Today, and Mancheese will be uploading it when she gets to it. Apparently Stock was targeted by trans activists. That's not really surprising, given that they will target anybody who they perceive as a threat, who's got any kind of public standing. So, yeah, I look forward to watching that on Manchi's channel. But did you do the consultation for the Gender Recognition Act in the UK? Oh, it looks like Laurie's frozen again. I don't know why. But I did actually do the whole thing, and I did, filled it out myself. And what I found was the biased language in it. And it was all trans activist language. And there were so many times that in the comments, I actually reworded the questions in order to answer them honestly. Because, it just came across as though they were fearful of trans activists for starters, that they adopted the language, and to me it looked like they'd already made a decision. But turns out they obviously hadn't. Manchi's the Great is saying, now the academics from around the world have come together and signed a letter saying they won't be intimidated by trans. Good. I don't know if anybody saw Edge of Reason. She did a video, maybe it was today, maybe it was about 12 hours ago or something like that. I'm trying to remember when, but it was a response to an article that said, politicians are afraid of trans activists and they don't feel like they can speak honestly. Now, she came back and just said, well, it's your job. And she was really angry. It's a very good video to watch. I'll have to try and find it and throw it into here later. But if you can find Edge of Reason, so that's IDGE rather than Edge of Reason, and look for a very recent video, and she explains, why she's so angry at their silence and fear in the face of trans activists. And she explains it better than I could. So I'm going to wind this up now, and thank everyone for turning up. And yeah, we'll be doing these regularly. We missed last week, and I was meant to do this yesterday, but obviously I had surgery yesterday, so I didn't do it. But we will be getting back on track as of next week. So yeah, nice to see everyone, and talk later.